today, the name Vermeer instantly conjures an image of his girl with the pearl earring painting, known as the Mona Lisa of the North. The 17th century Dutch master's rendition of an ordinary girl, sublimely glancing at the viewer from a mysterious black background with a shining pearl upon her lobe, has become a universal icon in the canon of Dutch Golden Age artwork. Vermeer's career was devoted to exploring tender moments of everyday life, documenting the private interior spaces of both mind and environment that epitomized the age of Baroque genre works. Yet his mastery of pigment and light elevated the artist beyond the realm of his contemporaries, providing an inimitable glimpse into the lifestyle of his thriving historical era. Girl with a Pearl Earring. Widely considered a masterpiece of Western art, this portrait is housed in the Mauritshuis Gallery in The Hague and is often referred to as the Mona Lisa of the North. Going by various names over the centuries, it became known by its present title towards the end of the 20th century after the earring worn by the girl portrayed there. His signature I Vermeer is located in the upper left corner of the painting. Although it is not very prominent and can be difficult to see, it is estimated to have been painted around 1665. In 1881, on the advice of Victor de Stuurs, who for years tried to prevent Vermeer's rare works from being sold to parties abroad, Arnoldus Andries d'Estaing purchased the work at an auction in The Hague for only 2 guilders and 30 cents, around 24 euros at current purchasing power. At the time, it was in poor condition. D'Estaing had no heirs and donated this and other paintings to the Mauritshuis in 1902. In 1937, a similar painting, Smiling Girl, at the time also thought to be by Vermeer, was donated by collector Andrew William Mellon to the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. Now widely considered to be a fake, the painting was claimed by Vermeer expert Arthur Wheelock in a 1995 study to be by 20th century artist and forger Theo van Wijngaarden, a friend of Han van Meegeren. The famous painting depicts a girl turning to look over her shoulder with her lips slightly open, as though about to speak. The painting is given a very dark background, which draws the viewer into the painting more and gives the girl a 3-dimensional quality. Using the technique of sfumato, the blurring of lines, much like how Leonardo used the method in the Mona Lisa, Vermeer achieves a very realistic portrayal of the girl's features. The painting is a trony, the Dutch 17th century description of a head that was not meant to be a portrait. It depicts a European girl wearing exotic dress, an oriental turban, and what appears to be a very large pearl as an earring. The subject of the painting is unknown, with it being possible either that she was a real model or that Vermeer created a more generalized and mysterious woman, perhaps representing a Sibyl or biblical figure. There has been speculation that she is the artist's eldest daughter, Maria, though this has been dismissed as an anachronism by some art historians. After the most recent restoration of the painting in 1994, the subtle color scheme and the intimacy of the girl's gaze toward the viewer have been greatly enhanced. During the restoration, it was discovered that the dark background, today somewhat mottled, was originally a deep, enamel-like green. This effect was produced by applying a thin, transparent layer of paint, a glaze over the black background seen now. However, the two organic pigments of the green glaze, indigo and weld, have faded. In 2014, Dutch astrophysicist Vincent Icke raised doubts about the material of the earring and argued that it looks more like polished tin than pearl on the grounds of the specular reflection, the pear shape, and the large size of the earring. As an example of how celebrated the painting is, novelist Tracy Chevalier published a historical novel, also entitled Girl with a Pearl Earring, in 1999, which encouraged new interest in Vermeer and his works. The novel was later adapted for film and as a successful play. A lady writing a letter. This painting is believed to have been completed by artist during his mature phase circa 1665. The lady depicted is writing a letter and appears to have been interrupted as she turns her head to regard the viewer. It is believed by many critics that Vermeer was inspired in this work by Ter Borch, a Dutch artist who had tackled the theme previously 10 years ago. The lady in the painting is shown writing a letter while sitting at a table in a room. She appears to have been interrupted, as she has turned her head away from the letter to look towards the viewer, while she continues to hold the quill in her right hand. She's dressed elegantly in a lemon-yellow morning jacket and wears a necklace with 10 pearls and 2 pearl earrings. The number of compositional elements in the painting are limited, and the focus is the woman's figure, and the sparse objects in the woman and the table are brought near to the picture plane, which emphasizes the directness of her gaze. All small objects in the painting are placed on the table. This concentration of small forms stand in contrasts with the large forms used in the rest of the composition, which create a geometric framework for the figure. On the back of the wall is a painting which covers 2/3 of the width of the composition. The painting, of which only a part is shown in the picture, depicts a large string instrument, possibly a double bass. It is known from the inventory of Vermeer's estate that he owned a vanitas still life with a double bass and skull. Based on a comparison of the depicted work and its description in the inventory of Vermeer's estate with the known vanitas still lifes of the Dutch painter Cornelis van der Meulen, it is likely that the painting on the wall is by van der Meulen's hand. Vanitas paintings were popular in the Dutch Republic. They aim to evoke the meaninglessness of worldly aspirations and the transient nature of all human endeavors, often by contrasting symbols of death and decay with luxurious objects or other items which relate to worldly success. Vermeer's intention in including a vanitas painting in a rich interior with an elegantly dressed lady was likely to convey this philosophical vanitas message that all worldly possessions and achievements are ultimately doomed to fail and end in death. Many of the objects seen in the painting, such as the woman's coat, the cloth on the table and the string of pearls, also appear in other Vermeer works. This has led to speculation that he or his family members owned the objects, and even that the subjects of the paintings are his relatives. It has often been suggested that in his paintings, Vermeer sought to depict in his models that which he could not give to his wife and family: calm and affluence. In 1940, a lady writing was bought by Sir Harry Oakes, the magistrate of the Bahamas, where it was hung until Oakes's death. After he had opposed a casino license, Oakes was tragically murdered by the mafia. The painting was then sold by his widow to Horace Havemeyer, whose sons later bequeathed it to the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. Girl with a Red Hat. This painting was completed by 1666 and is classed as being one of Vermeer's tronies, a genre of painting that depicts models fancifully dressed, unintended to be portraits of specific subjects. The portrait depicts a very young woman dressed in blue, wearing a collar that appears to be lace and a red hat. Her hair is up and she wears a pair of dangling earrings. She looks at the spectator as if she has just turned her head in the direction of a sound, a voice, that has captured her attention. Her mouth is ajar, and her face, slightly pink, receives light from the right, which is unusual in the works of Johannes Vermeer. However, after a study using the latest technology in preparation for a 2022 exhibition, titled Vermeer's Secrets, it was ascertained that Vermeer began by painting the portrait of a man wearing a wide-brimmed hat. The older pigment analysis by art historian Hans Kuhn was supplemented by a more recent investigation. The red hat is painted in 2 layers. The lower layer consists of vermilion mixed with a black pigment. The upper layer is a madder lake glaze. Vermeer used a mixture of azurite and yellow ochre for the green areas and umbra, for the browns in the wall. The painting may have been among those owned by Vermeer's patron Ruyven. In 1932, to the Andrew William Mellon Educational and Charitable Trust in Pittsburgh, gave the painting to the National Gallery of Art in Washington, where it hangs today. Girl with a Flute. This painting is also housed in the National Gallery of Art in Washington. The attribution to Vermeer has been considered controversial by some art historians, who have pointed out that the poor representation of the dubious musical instrument in the picture is rare in Vermeer's work. The girl's hat is also odd, with its shape being similar to that of a Chinese coolie hat, which would have been considered an exotic curio in the Netherlands at the time. Though, on the other hand, it would be strange that a forger should have invented such bizarre headwear. Scientific examination of the picture confirms it dates from Vermeer's time. A dendrochronology analysis of the oak panel, based on an examination of tree rings, showed that the tree was felled in the early 1650s, which is consistent with the proposed dating for a Vermeer work. The painting was discovered in a private collection in Brussels by Abraham Bredius, who exhibited it at the Mauritshuis in 1906. It was then bought by the American collector Joseph Wiedner in the 1920s and given to the National Gallery of Art in Washington in 1942. The Concert. Completed by 1666, this painting depicts a musical trio of a woman playing a harpsichord, a seated man with a lute, and a woman singing an accompaniment. All three are deep in concentration, and the mood appears to be tranquil. In the foreground of the painting is a table covered with an oriental rug with scores and a citern placed on top. The pattern of the black and white floor tiles draws the eye towards the musical trio gathered around the instrument. The underside of the harpsichord's lid is decorated with a painting of a serene landscape. On the back wall to the right, there hangs a painting by Dirk van Babberens called The Procuress, which also appears in Vermeer's A Lady Seated at the Virginal, implying that the artist personally owned the work. The concert was owned by the French critic Thoré and sold by his heirs in 1892 to the wealthy American collector Isabella Stewart Gardner, whose house became a museum in Boston on her death in 1924. The painting was the most important work lost when 11 pictures were stolen from the museum on 18th March 1990, and it has not yet been recovered. It is thought to be the most valuable unrecovered stolen painting, with a value estimated at over $200 million. The Art of Painting. This famous work is an allegory of painting and is the largest and most complex of Vermeer's surviving works. It depicts an artist painting a female subject in his studio by a window, with a large map of the Netherlands on the wall behind. The painting has only two figures, the subject and the painter, which is thought to be a self-portrait of Vermeer, though the face is not visible. Experts attribute symbolism to various aspects of the painting. The subject is the muse of history, Clio, wearing a laurel wreath, holding a trumpet and a large tome. The double-headed eagle, symbol of the Austrian Habsburg dynasty, former rulers of Holland, which adorns the central golden chandelier, may have represented the Catholic faith. Vermeer was unusual in being a Catholic in a predominantly Protestant Netherlands. The absence of candles in the chandelier might represent the suppression of the Catholic faith. The map on the back wall has a rip that divides the Netherlands between the north and south. The rip symbolizes the division between the Dutch Republic to the north and the Habsburg-controlled Flemish provinces to the south. The map by Claus Jansch Wischke details the earlier political division between the Union of Utrecht to the north and the colonies to the south. The painting is considered to have been very valuable to Vermeer, as he chose never to part with it or sell it, even when he was in debt. In 1676, his widow Katharina bequeathed the piece to her mother, Maria Twins, in an attempt to avoid the sale of the painting to satisfy creditors. The executor of Vermeer's estate, the famous Delft microscopist Anton van Leeuwenhoek, determined that the transferal of the work to the late painter's mother-in-law was illegal. It is not known who owned the painting for most of the 18th century. Until 1860, the painting was considered to be by Vermeer's contemporary Pieter de Hooch, as Vermeer was little known until the late 19th century. Pieter's signature was even forged on the painting. It was at the intervention of French scholar Torre Berger and the German art historian Gustav Friedrich Wagen that it was recognized as a Vermeer original. It was placed on public display in the Czernin Museum in Vienna. After the Nazi invasion of Austria, top Nazi officials, including Reichsmarshal Hermann Göring, attempted to acquire the painting. It was finally acquired from its then owner, Count Jaromir Czernin, by Adolf Hitler for his personal collection at a price of 1.65 million Reichsmark through his agent Hans Posse on November 20th, 1940. The painting was rescued from a salt mine at the end of World War II in 1945, where it was preserved from Allied bombing raids, with other works of art. The painting was escorted to Vienna from Munich by Andrew Ritchie, chief of the Monument's Fine Arts and Archives program for Austria, who transported it by locking himself and the painting in a train compartment. The Americans gave the painting to the Austrian government in 1946 instead of the Czernin family, as it was deemed to have been sold voluntarily, without undue force from Hitler. The painting is now the property of the state of Austria and on display at the Kunsthistorisches Museum, Vienna. Study of a young woman. This portrait was completed by 1667 and is now housed in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, New York. Because of its almost identical size and its proximity in tone and composition, it is often considered to be either a variant or counterpart to the famous girl with a pearl earring. The subjects of both paintings wear pearl earrings, have scarves draped over their shoulders, and are shown in front of a plain black background. In addition, it is likely that the creation of both works involved the use of a camera obscura. The sitter is depicted as having a homely face, a wide-spaced and flat face, small nose and thin lips. This apparent lack of idealized beauty has led to a general belief that this work was painted on commission, although it is possible that the model was the artist's daughter. The picture encourages the viewer to be curious about the young woman's thoughts, feelings, or character, something typical in many of Vermeer's paintings. Girl with a pearl earring and this painting are unusual for Vermeer in that they lack his usual rich background. Instead, the girls are framed by a background of deep black, producing an isolating effect and heightening the girl's appearance of vulnerability. The painting may have been owned by Peter Claes van Rooyen of Delft before 1674, then by his widow and next their daughter. Later, Prince August Marie Raymond d'Arenberg of Brussels owned the painting by 1829, and it remained in his family in Brussels and Schloss Meppen from 1833 to the early 1950s. In 1959, the work was bought in a private sale from the Prince d'Arenberg by Mr. Charles Reitzman and Mrs. Jane Reitzman of New York for a sum estimated at around £400,000 sterling. In 1979, the Reitzmans donated the picture to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in memory of French painter Théodore Rousseau. Mistress and Maid, now forming part of the Frick collection in New York. This painting depicts a maid, plainly dressed in a brown bodice and blue apron, leaning towards her mistress while holding a letter tentatively in her hand. The mistress raises her fingers to her chin in a gesture of apprehension, so we are allowed to see little of her expression. Although it is often assumed that the maid is handing her a letter which has just arrived, the quill in the mistress's right hand may suggest the maid is asking for instructions on where to deliver the note just written by her mistress. There is a strong use of yellow in the woman's elegant fur-lined overcoat, and blue in the silk tablecloth and the maid's apron. The focus of the painting is the two women as they are sitting at a desk, doing an everyday activity. Vermeer was known for his domestic scenes containing women. The light in the painting comes from the left and falls on the mistress's face. The mistress has a pensive gaze, with her lips parted slightly and her fingertips lifted to her chin in a questioning manner. The lighted parts of the yellow overcoat are formed with sweeping brush strokes of lead tin yellow, and the shadows are created with definition. Vermeer uses a dark background, as he does in other paintings such as Portrait of a Young Woman and Girl with a Pearl Earring. Pearls were an important status symbol of the period, and that was reflected in the mistress' fancy attire and her abundance of pearls. Letters are a prevalent theme in Vermeer's paintings from the 1660s. Earlier works, such as Woman in Blue, Reading a Letter, circa 1663, 1664, depict a woman by herself with a letter, but in this painting the added maid is a new element. The gestures and expressions of the two women suggest anxiety over the letter and its potential contents. Surviving records show that there was a painting representing two persons, one of whom is writing a letter, which Vermeer's widow Catharina gave to the baker Van Buiten in settlement of the family's bread bill. The Astronomer. This painting is housed in the Louvre, and along with the next painting, The Geographer, they are both the only paintings by Vermeer to depict a man without a female companion. They were most likely pendants, forming a pair of paintings designed to hang together, since they are almost the same size and depict the same sitter. Both works are also dated, with The Astronomer being completed in 1668 and The Geographer in the following year. The date in this work is inscribed in Roman numerals on the cupboard, just above the scholar's hand. The astronomer is portrayed sitting at a table, bending forward to turn the globe, version by Jodocus Hondius. Above the cupboard are many books of various sizes, and attached to the front is a curious diagram, which has yet to be understood. The book on the table, the 1621 edition of Adrian Metius's Institutiones Astronomicae Geographicae. Symbolically, the volume is open to Book 3, a section advising the astronomer to seek inspiration from God. On the wall is a painting of the Finding of Moses. Moses may represent knowledge and science, learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians, which Vermeer portrayed in at least one other work. Portrayals of scientists were a favorite topic in 17th century Dutch painting, and Vermeer's oeuvre includes both this astronomer and the slightly later The Geographer. Both are believed to portray the same man, possibly Antony van Leeuwenhoek. A 2017 study indicated that the canvas for the two works came from the same bolt of material, confirming their close relationship. The two paintings appear to have been kept together until the late 18th century. The Astronomer was acquired in the 1880s by the Paris-based banker Baron Alphonse de Rothschild. In 1940, the Nazis confiscated it from his son Eduard, and Hitler ordered it to be taken to Germany. In 1945, the Astronomer was returned to the Rothschild family and acquired by the Louvre in 1983. The Geographer. This painting depicts a geographer bending over a nautical chart. In his right hand he holds a pair of dividers, which were commonly used to measure distance on a map. The geographer's eyes peer through the window and sunlight bathes the side of his face as he pauses, silent in contemplation. The room is noticeably brighter than the interior in The Astronomer, which was completed the year before this work. The geographer, dressed in a Japanese-style robe then popular among scholars, is shown to be someone excited by intellectual inquiry, with his active stance, the presence of maps, charts, a globe and books, as well as the dividers he holds in his right hand, according to Arthur Kingsland Wheelock. The energy in this painting is conveyed most notably through the figure's pose, the massing of objects on the left side of the composition, and the sequence of diagonal shadows on the wall to the right. Vermeer made several changes in the painting that enhanced the feeling of energy in the picture. The man's head was originally in a different position to the left of where the viewer now sees it, indicating the man perhaps was looking down rather than peering out the window. The dividers he holds in his hand were originally vertical, not horizontal. A sheet of paper was originally on the small stool at the lower right, and removing it probably made that area darker. Details of the man's face are slightly blurred, suggesting movement, also a feature of Vermeer's mistress and maid, according to Serena Carr. His eyes are narrowed, perhaps squinting in the sunlight or an indication of intense thinking. Carr asserts that the painting depicts a flash of inspiration or even revelation. The drawn curtain on the left and the position of the oriental carpet on the table pushed back are both symbols of revelation. He grips a book as if he's about to snatch it up to corroborate his ideas. The Globe was published in Amsterdam in 1618 by Jodocus Hondius. Terrestrial and celestial globes were commonly sold together, and the celestial globe in the Astronomer was also a Hondius, Hendrik, rather than Judicus. Another indication that the two paintings were created as pendant pieces, according to Kant. The globe is turned toward the Indian Ocean, where the Dutch East India Company was then active. Vermeer used an impasto technique to apply pointillé dots, not to indicate light reflected more strongly on certain points, but to emphasize the dull ochre cartouche frame printed on the globe. Since the globe can be identified, we know the decorative cartouche includes a plea for information for future editions, reflecting the theme of revelation in the painting. The cartographic objects surrounding the man are some of the actual items a geographer would have. The globe, the dividers the man holds, a cross-staff, hung on the center post of the window, used to measure the angle of celestial objects like the sun or stars, and the chart the man is using, which, according to one scholar, James A. Wellu, appears to be a nautical chart on vellum. The sea chart on the wall of all the seacoasts of Europe has been identified as one published by Willem Jans. Bleu. This accuracy indicates Vermeer had a source familiar with the profession. The Astronomer, which seems to form a pendant with this painting, shows a similar sophisticated knowledge of cartographic instruments and books, and the same young man modeled for both. That man himself may have been the source of Vermeer's correct display of surveying and geographical instruments, and possibly of his knowledge of perspective. Wheelock and others assert the model source was probably Antony van Leeuwenhoek, 1632–1723, a contemporary of Vermeer who was also born in Delft. The families of both men were in the textile business, and both families had a strong interest in science and optics. A microscopist, Van Leeuwenhoek was described after his death as being so skilled in navigation, astronomy, mathematics, philosophy, and natural science that one can certainly place him with the most distinguished masters of the art. Another image of Van Leeuwenhoek, by the Delft artist Jan Vercollier, about 20 years later, shows a broad face and straight nose, similar to Vermeer's model. At the time Vermeer painted the two works, the scientist would have been about 36 years old. He would have been actively studying for his examination for surveyor, which he passed on 4 February 1669. There is no documentary evidence for any kind of relationship between the two men during Vermeer's lifetime, although in 1676 Van Leeuwenhoek was appointed a trustee for Vermeer's estate. The pose of the figure in Vermeer's painting takes up precisely the position of Faust in Rembrandt's famous etching, although facing the opposite direction, according to Lawrence Going. Similar arrangements can be found in drawings by Nicolaes Mies. Vermeer's signature is inscribed on the cupboard and with the year 1669 on the wall behind. The inscription on the wall was painted in the 18th or 19th century. It may give the correct year, having been copied from an accurate source, although, like the Astronomer, it might date from the previous year. The wealth of his wife's family allowed Vermeer to paint for his own pleasure, rather than to support his family as was the case for most other painters, and he never took on pupils or apprentices. The painter was also known to have used expensive pigments like lapis lazuli for the skirt of the Milkmaid and deep carmine for the dress of the girl, with a wine glass. While some have suggested that Vermeer's long-term patron Pieter van Ruyven would have bought and supplied the artist with these exclusive ingredients, it is perhaps unsurprising that it was around this time that the painter began his own downward slide into debt. The Love Letter. Housed in the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, this painting depicts a seated woman playing the cittern, having been interrupted by her maid, who hands her a letter. Above the fireplace, two paintings are displayed. The lower one depicting a sailing boat, which some believe is a lost work by Vermeer, and the other picture is a landscape in the style of Jacob van Ruysdael. The tied-up curtain in the foreground creates the impression that the viewer is looking at an intensely private, personal scene. There is also an element of trompe-l'œil, as Dutch paintings were often hung with little curtains to conserve them, and the device of painted curtains is seen in other Dutch works of the period. The diagonals on the checkered floor create the impression of depth and three-dimensionality. The fact that it is a love letter that the woman has received is made clear by the fact that she is carrying a cittern, a form of lute used in the period as a symbol of love, often carnal love. Luit was also a slang term for vagina. This idea is further reinforced by the slippers at the very bottom of the picture. The removed slipper was another symbol of sex. The floor brush would appear to represent domesticity, and its placement at the side of the painting may suggest that domestic concerns have been forgotten or pushed aside. The colors blue and gold are important in the composition of the painting. In the household that the love letter takes place in, gilded ornamentation indicates substantial wealth. The gold is located on the woman's dress, the top of the fireplace, and many of the objects which complements the blue on the floor, the maid's dress, the picture frames. Classical influence is also apparent in the Ionic columns of the fireplace. The two paintings on the wall are also significant. The lower painting is of a stormy sea, a metaphor for tempestuous love. Above it is a landscape painting of a traveler on a sandy road. This may refer to the absence of the man who is writing to the lady. Love Letter remains the only one of Vermeer's works to incorporate a seascape. The two women are most likely the same models as those in the earlier Mistress and Maid. Both works concern a letter and provoke questions regarding the mistress' relationship with an absent lover. Interestingly, the love letter was stolen on 24 September 1971 whilst on loan to an exhibition in Brussels, but the work was fortunately recovered 13 days later. The Lace Maker. This painting was completed by 1670 and is housed in the Louvre, Paris. The Lace Maker is the smallest of Vermeer's paintings. It depicts a young woman dressed in a yellow shawl, holding a pair of bobbins in her left hand as she carefully places a pin in the pillow on which she is making her bobbin lace. Vermeer probably used a camera obscura while composing the work, as many optical effects typical of photography can be seen, especially the blurring of the foreground. Vermeer presents the various elements which compose both the girl's face and body as well as the pattern of the material she's working on in an abstract manner. The girl's hands, the curls of her hair, and the cross which form her eyes and nose are all portrayed in an abstract manner unusual for the era in which Vermeer worked. In addition, the red and white of the lace is shown as spilling from the sewing cushion with physical properties suggesting a near-liquid form. The blurring of these threads contrasts sharply with the precision of the lace she's shown working on. Vermeer's painting is often compared to a 1662 canvas of the same name by the Dutch portrait and genre painter Caspar Netscher. However, Vermeer's work is very different in tone. In the earlier work, both the girl's shoes and the mussel shells near her feet have sexual connotations, which are completely absent in Vermeer's handling of the subject. Vermeer's late paintings feature greater abstraction as they focus on describing patterns and colors of objects rather than their textures. These paintings are crisper, with bold and angular planes of color. This development in style can be seen in his paintings such as Lady Writing a Letter with Her Maid, 1670, and The Guitar Player, 1672. Lady Writing a Letter with Her Maid. This painting is now housed in the National Gallery of Ireland, Dublin. It depicts a middle-class woman attended by a housemaid who is presumably acting as messenger and go-between for the lady and her lover. The work is seen as a bridge between the quiet restraint and self-containment of Vermeer's work of the 1660s and his relatively cooler work of the 1670s. It may have been partly inspired by Ter Borch's painting Woman Sealing a Letter. The painting's canvas was almost certainly cut from the same bolt used for Woman with a Lute. Lady Writing a Letter with Her Maid is the first of the artist's experiments with centrifugal composition, where the focus is not only on the center of the canvas. In addition, it is his third work in which the drama and dynamic are not centered on a single figure. The maid is shown standing in the midground behind her lady with her hands crossed and waiting for the letter to be completed. The positions of their bodies indicate that the two women are disconnected. The folded arms of the maid seem outwardly as an attempt to display a sense of self-containment. However, she is detached from her lady both emotionally and psychologically. The maid's gaze towards the half-visible window indicates an inner restlessness and boredom, as she waits impatiently for the messenger to carry her lady's letter away. Some art historians dispute the absoluteness of this view. According to Pascal Bonafou, while complicity is not indicated by a look or a smile from either woman, the mere fact of her presence during such an intimate act as the composition of a love letter indicates at least a degree of intimacy between the two. The crumpled page lying on the floor could denote an unwelcome letter that the lady has just received, or an earlier draft of her letter which she has thrown away. A large painting is depicted on the rear wall of the Finding of Moses, taken from the story in Exodus describing how the infant Moses was found near the bank of the Nile. Moses is portrayed after his rescue, surrounded by the Pharaoh's daughter and handmaidens. The painting contains many of Vermeer's usual painterly motifs, in particular his obsession with the inside-outside axis of interior spaces, and through his depiction of the tiled floor and the verticals of the dresses, window frame and back wall painting. His interest in geometry and abstract forms, recalling his earlier view of Delft, the lacemaker and the art of painting. This painting was owned by Sir Alfred Bate, the former Member of Parliament, who died in 1994. It was housed at Rusborough House in Ireland, from where it was stolen twice. It was first taken on 26 April 1974 when it was among 18 pictures stolen by a gang connected to the IRA. Lady writing a letter with her maid was recovered 8 days later with very little damage to the work. On 21 May 1986, the painting was stolen a second time and recovered in Antwerp 7 years later. Sir Alfred presented a number of paintings to the National Gallery of Ireland in 1987, including this painting, which forms part of the Irish National Collection. Allegory of Faith. This painting is housed in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, New York. It is an unusual painting in the oeuvre of Vermeer, in that it represents an allegory of the Catholic faith. The figure of Faith is portrayed with a theatrical pose, clasping a hand to her breast, gazing fervently upwards, while her right foot rests on a globe. On the grand table, a chalice and an open Bible are displayed. The globe is the same prop that was depicted in The Geographer, and Faith rests her foot on the continent of Asia, which has encouraged many varied interpretations. On the floor lies a bitten apple, connoting sin. The twisted serpent has been crushed by a stone and blood gushes from its mouth, symbolizing the triumph of good over evil. The previous masterpiece, the art of painting, clearly served as a prototype for Allegory of Faith, which was most likely commissioned by a Catholic admirer of the earlier work. Both paintings are set in the same room with very similar decorations. Ironically, not long after Vermeer's death, Allegory of Faith was acquired by a Protestant collector, the banker Herman van Swol, although originally intended for a Catholic patron. The guitar player. In this painting, Vermeer depicts a young girl strumming a guitar. The instrument is placed comfortably on her lap while she plays near a window, sitting in the corner of a room. Her attire is made up of an ermine-bordered yellow jacket, an ivory-colored satin dress, and a pearl necklace. Surrounding her is a painted pastoral landscape bordered by an extravagant picture frame, a blank wall, 3 books, and a guitar. Prior to this painting, Vermeer portrayed individuals with obscure expressions. On the contrary, this young girl has an open expression that is joyous and flirtatious. The girl's smile and tipped head, along with the fixed gaze on something just outside the painting, suggests that she is playing not for us, but for an unseen individual. Her dress and hairstyle reflect the relevant fashions of the wealthy Dutch in that day. The young girl is portrayed with wholesome features and a free expression, as if she is in the act of speaking or singing. The joyous demeanor established in this painting is conveyed through the young girl's self-expression, the peaceful landscape pictured behind her, and the soft tones of light and dark. Due to these factors, Vermeer is able to provoke feelings of calmness and contentment. Dated circa 1672, this work of art is one of Vermeer's final artistic activities, providing insight into the techniques he mastered and approaches to painting he favored. The painting has been on display at Kenwood House, London since the 1920s, as part of the Iveagh Bequest collection. After being recovered from a theft in 1974 when the painting was held for ransom, the guitar player was returned to Kenwood House. The mourning jacket portrayed in this painting resembles 5 separate Vermeer paintings, 3 of which are A Lady Writing a Letter, Mistress and Maid, and Woman with a Pearl Necklace. In each painting, the jacket depicts different types of folds, distribution of spots, and fur trim. The thin patches of grey and yellow lead tin paint categorize the abstract pattern that establishes the folds in the jacket's fabric and fur trim. Vermeer's devotion to painting light and shade can be acknowledged through the inclusion of dark brown shadows painted on the young musician's right arm and shoulder. From a distance, these small patches seem blended, but they are actually laying side by side. Historians conclude that the fur on Vermeer's mourning jacket was not made from ermine but either cat, squirrel, or mouse. The fur was then decorated with faux spots. The jacket in The Guitar Player is one of the few surviving examples of 17th century overcoats. Vermeer's depiction of a pearl necklace alludes to the young girl's elegant lifestyle. In this work, he used an abstract technique to portray the pearl necklace, which was replicated in his painting, Allegory of Faith. To begin, He painted a base layer of dark greenish-gray that curved around her neck to depict a shadow. Over the shadow, he created a hazy sequence of white spherical highlights. He did not define the individual pearls to portray the natural translucence of the gemstone. Compared to his paintings of the mid-1660s, Vermeer simplified and dismissed intense detail for abstracted portrayals. This shows an outgrowth of his own style, along with a technique that was not frequented by artists of his time. Vermeer's depiction of a young girl making music is associated with the nobility found in artistic inspiration, as well as the art of painting in the 17th century. The guitar originated in Spain and was keenly sought after in the Dutch Republic. Compared to the lute, the guitar was cheaper and easier to play. This instrument has been decorated with a combination of ivory, ebony, tortoiseshell, and mother of pearl. The sound hole is created with multiple layers of ornately scrolled paper. In the 17th century, the guitar was used as both a continuo, harmonic instrument and a solo instrument. The music the guitar produces is bolder than that of the lute, and this is due to the design of the chords. The guitar strings reverberate deeper and fuller than that of past instruments. It does not play as loud as the modern flamenco guitar, and the gut strings are played with fingers. This painting depicts a 5-course guitar, which was standard for most solo musicians. Vermeer's depiction of a guitar suggests a move into the modern world of music, in which the lute is left behind with its contemplative and conservative traditions. The depiction of this guitar was created with immense attention to detail. The sound hole is created with the depiction of a finely tooled gold rose, where Vermeer has created an abstract arrangement of painted strokes. These strokes are highlighted with hazy accents of lead tin yellow paint. The decorative white and black trim of the guitar's border intensifies the painting's cheerful atmosphere. The small detailed sound hole was created with blobs of impasto paint, which portrays the light reflecting across its slick, uneven surface. The most influential and well-thought-out technique Vermeer used in this painting focuses on the guitar's strings. Some of the strings are blurred. This suggests that they have been strummed and are vibrating. Because of this, we can assume she is in the midst of playing a song. Vermeer's picture within a picture was identified by art historian Gregor Weber. The landscape that is depicted behind the young girl's head is identified with Peter Jansch's, a wooded landscape with a gentleman and dogs in the foreground. In Vermeer's version, the mimicked composition is cropped slightly on top and on the right. The head of the young musician covers the gentleman and dogs. Vermeer's version guides the viewer's focus towards the centered tree, as well as incorporating blue skies and greener foliage. Vermeer may have incorporated this sun-filled pastoral landscape into his painting in reference to woman's beauty. Artists in the 17th century were often attributing the topic of female beauty to nature, which was frequently expressed through poetry and music. Vermeer's depiction of a whitewashed wall allowed him to set the stage for a scene that illustrates an individual strumming a guitar composed on the left side of the canvas. The painting's composition is balanced due to the large negative space the wall creates. The unobtrusive wall helps establish the mood of the painting, as well as the lighting scheme and spatial depth. Because of the wall's color, Vermeer was able to establish a warm and welcoming temperature from the incoming light. Vermeer's brushwork also implies the light's direction. According to the Delft building historian Wim Weave, the use of whitewashed walls was frequently integrated in the houses, castles, and churches of the Dutch in the Middle Ages. The beginning process of whitewashing a wall starts with a thick application of lime putty, which is created with burned seashells. When the putty dries and the wall is thick enough, then the process of whitewashing with paint can begin. Although unrecognizable to the untrained eye, this wooden chair is portrayed several times through Vermeer's artistic career. At the top left-hand side of the painting, behind her shoulder, a silhouette of a lion-head finial can be found. This finial references chairs designed and crafted by the Spanish. When constructing this chair, the Spanish craftsmen used leather and not cloth. This is due to Spain's constant supply of rawhide. These chairs were respected for their craftsmanship and creativity, and the creators of these chairs regarded themselves as superior within the craftsman guilds. Vermeer's decision to depict 3 books suggests the young girl's sophistication, which is implied through a high level of education. Even though scholars do not know the book titles, it has been argued that the middle book's bulkiness resembles the Bible, and it has been stated that the possible representation of the Bible implies biblical advice. If this is true, then the painting could indicate a decision to morally ignore the religious text. The young girl's body language and facial expression turn away from the book to pay attention to the individual on her right. Others argue that the presence of the book implies learning, which is familiar in Dutch paintings of the Middle Ages. According to scholar Elise Goodman, the young musician featured in this painting would be a member of the haute bourgeoisie who could read, write, and speak several languages. Vermeer's artistic style in the 1670s is often compared to his earlier style of the mid-1660s. The guitar player properly demonstrates the energy of Vermeer's late style. His earlier paintings portray quiet, self-contained worlds, but the guitar player is different. His late style demonstrated abstract painting techniques, in which the depiction of motion is portrayed through the diffused illustration of shifting objects. With Vermeer's experience, he began to create paintings that demonstrate dynamic poses and actions, implying that a movement, or in this case, sound, is taking place. The guitar player is often compared to Vermeer's Woman with a Lute. This is another painting by Vermeer which was later stolen, this time from Kenwood House on 23 February 1974 by supporters of the IRA. Fortunately, 10 weeks later it was recovered in a churchyard in Smithfield, London. Lady Standing at a Virginal. This painting is now housed in the National Gallery, London, and depicts a young woman playing the virginal. Looking directly at the viewer, she seems to recognize someone who has just entered the room, and she smiles at them. On the virginal's lid, a landscape can be seen, and there is also a small landscape picture hanging on the wall in the style of Jan Wynants. The large picture of Cupid is thought to have been inspired by an engraved emblematic image by Otto van Veen. Cupid holds a card showing the number 1 or an ace, which was a symbol of fidelity. Lady Seated at a Virginal, also housed in the National Gallery, London, this work is most likely Vermeer's last surviving painting, which may have been inspired by Gerard Dows' Woman Playing the Virginal, completed a few years earlier in 1665. The painting depicts a young woman sitting at a virginal, who turns to the viewer with a mysterious look. The painting on the back wall is The Procuress by Van Barbaren, which was depicted earlier in the concert. Van Barbaren's painting symbolizes mercenary love, which contrasts with the faithful love of Cupid represented in the previous Vermeer painting, A Lady Standing at the Virginal. Many critics believe that both of these Vermeer works were pendants, as they are almost identical in size. After Vermeer's death, the two paintings were separated, and it was only in 1867 that they were reunited by the critic Thoré. Once more they were separated in 1892 when Lady Standing at the Virginal was bought by the National Gallery, but the other painting was then acquired by George Salting, who bequeathed it to the National Gallery in 1910. Since then, both pictures, which represent the last of Vermeer's works, hang together in the gallery. A young woman seated at the virginals. This disputed work is housed in a private collection in New York. The painting is thought to date from circa 1672. Until recently, the work was little known, but it was determined to be a Vermeer painting through technical examination and passages of painting very similar to those in Vermeer's Lady Seated at a Virginal. According to the technical analysis performed by the special committee that studied the work, telltale signs of ultramarine blue were discovered in the light grey color of the wall. It is well known that Vermeer used this pigment extensively in his oeuvre, providing further evidence that the painting is by the Delft master. The last 3 years of Vermeer's life were filled with hardship following the 1672 invasion of the Dutch Republic by the French, German, and British armies. This led to a dramatic economic crash for the once prosperous middle-class country. The art market plummeted, and Vermeer could barely afford to keep himself, his wife, her mother, and his 11 children. He took on increasing amounts of debt, borrowing thousands of guilders, and was even caught pocketing his mother-in-law's money. Vermeer died on December 16, 1675, having fallen into a fit of madness and depression. In the court records, his wife stated that, during the ruinous war with France, he not only was unable to sell any of his art, but also, to his great detriment, was left sitting with the paintings of other masters that he was dealing in. As a result, and owing to the great burden of his children having no means of his own, he lapsed into such decay and decadence, which he had so taken to heart that, as if he had fallen into a frenzy in a day and a half, he went from being healthy to being dead. Due to the very localized fame during his lifetime, Vermeer seemed to disappear from the art world until the 19th century, when French artists in the manner of Edouard Manet started to turn their eyes toward the real and unpretentious. Since Vermeer had been so adept at capturing moments of ordinary beauty, He became a major influence on these artists, who revived an awareness of the master's work. Despite the fact that only 34, 3 more are disputed Vermeers, of his pieces have survived. Vermeer is considered today to be one of the greatest artists of the Dutch Golden Age. In the 20th century, the surrealist Salvador Dali became entranced by Vermeer's work and produced his own variations, including The Ghost of Vermeer of Delft, which can be used as a table in 1934, as well as The Lace Maker, after Vermeer, in 1955. Other artists like the Danish painter Wilhelm Hammershøi adapted Vermeer's calm domestic interiors for their own 19th and 20th century subjects. Hammershøi has modernized Vermeer's Woman in Blue, reading a letter by reversing the image and subduing the color palette so that it almost feels the audience is looking at an early photograph of a domestic Danish interior. Among many of his exalted paintings, Girl with a Pearl Earring is considered the Mona Lisa of the North. Its staggering realism and emotional ambiguity has inspired artists, novelists, and filmmakers for decades. Most recently, the anonymous British graffiti artist Banksy reinterpreted and reproduced the painting on a building in Bristol, UK, using a burglar alarm in place of the iconic pearl earring.